culture of violence and conflict still rages in the hearts and minds of many Filipinos. From our historical experience, dear friends, we Filipinos know that peace does not merely mean the absence of conflict. As Nelia Eleanor Roosevelt Gonzalez said, peace means the fulfillment of the hopes that we all share, of lifting up the common life, and of winning the future for every Filipino, including the unborn. Because peace and development must always go together, they being on the two sides of the same coin. The equally difficult task of ensuring sustainable development in the affected areas has become a top priority of any government administration. The Ramos administration during that time, the Estrada administration, and now the Arroyo administration. And yet, what do we see in the headlines today? It's not about the Olympics. It's properly should capture the headlines. It's about rebels torching houses in Sulu. Today po ito. Ano pa? Basilan, town taken. Gera dun. Anong malungkot para sa aming mga sundalo, mga veterano, mga pulis? AFP pounds MILF positions. You know, while this may be a legitimate order on the part of higher authority, soldiers and policemen are those who yearn for peace most of all. Because it is they and their families who suffer long periods of separation, deprivation even, and who daily are under the threat of early death. Pero sa palagay ko naman, kahit na malungkot yun, ang pinakamalungkot ay yung nangyayari sa mga innocent civilians. Ito yun. 130,000 villagers dislocated in North Cotabato. And this is the result of some misunderstanding, which, in my honest belief, can be and should be cleared up, mitigated, and somehow settled within the precious little time left in this administration. Anyway, let me also say, for the historical record of it, that we Filipinos must now realize that we cannot develop separately into separate geographic regions, social classes, or religious groupings isolated from one another. Indeed, our basic strength, dear friends, must come from our unity, our solidarity, and our teamwork, in spite of our cultural diversity and archipelagic configuration. We talk about unity, and to me, that means unity of purpose. Iisang hangarin dapat ang lahat ng mga Pinoy. Solidarity in terms of values, in terms of freedom, democracy, respect for the rule of law and human rights. Also, of course, respect for elders, like Justice Sarmiento, Veteran Pat Viloria, and yours truly. We also have learned that our generation of leaders now and our fathers and grandfathers had lived in the reality of conflict somewhere in the Philippines, that we may have already forgotten the one obvious truth about the whole matter, and that is that it is in the hearts and minds of men and women that conflict and violence begins. It is in the transformation, therefore, of people as individuals, be they leaders or common folk, and people as a national society as we are now. It is in their transformation that peace and nonviolence are ultimately to be found. We cannot import that from USA, neither from Singapore, neither from Kuala Lumpur, neither from Beijing. The Philippines indeed claims credit for the first ever peaceful people power revolution that toppled a dictatorship. The first such victory achieved without violence in modern times. And EDSA Uno inspired many other nations, then under the yoke of oppression, to regain the rights and liberty in that peaceful and non-violent manner. Let me tell you about my own experience as Commander-in-Chief during the peace process with the Moro National Liberation Front, as well as with the military rebels, the mutineers of the period from 86 to 91. For me, the government of the Republic of the Philippines, Moro National Liberation Front peace process is a valuable experience of how extra resolve to follow the ways of peace can achieve success, even under the most trying conditions. Peace in Mindanao was the work of many hands, joining together, and this was harvested by way of a final peace agreement that was enforced during my next 2 years thereafter, and for some 2.5 more years during the successor administration. Peace in Mindanao indeed was the work of many hands joining together, and also the helpful assistance of many good people from several other countries. I remember receiving the bad news in April 1995, just when our two peace panels had already reached 31 points of consensus on education, on economic and financial systems, as well as on governance for an expanded autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, or the ARMM. In the middle of our quiet rejoicing, a terrorist raid took place in the town of Ipil in Zamboanga del Sur. That's now in the province of Zamboanga, Sibugay, in the course of which some 200 heavily armed men razed the commercial center of 150,000 people, robbing 7 banks, killing more than 50 civilians, policemen, and soldiers, and wounding many more. The terrorists belong to a mix of the Abu Sayyaf, the so-called National Islamic Command Council, or NICC, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, MILF, and various lost commands, which were the extremist groups fighting for an Islamic state in Mindanao. The violence in Ipil, dear friends, could have broken the back of the peace negotiations. We had arrived at 31 consensus points. And by the way, that's also the number of consensus points already agreed upon between the GRP and the MILF since the two groups started talking peace back in June 2001, or 7 years ago. The violence in Ipil, I recall, could have broken the back of the peace negotiations, and we could have accepted the futility of ever achieving peace in Mindanao and returned to the decision of relying on the force of arms as our remaining course of action. But both sides reined in their emotions, held their tempers, reviewed their options, and doggedly pursued the peace initiative towards a win-win solution. And the lesson I learned then is that in any peace effort, the leader must always focus on the long term, the strategic vision of peace and development, and to be refused to be stampeded to contrary action by tactical pressures from the enemies of the peace process. Indeed, Filipinos must claim credit for the peaceful, nonviolent people revolution to overthrow a dictatorship. But it must also claim credit for a new paradigm defined by our so-called 6 paths to peace, which paved the way for the final settlement in September 1996 of 27 years of violence in Mindanao that claimed 120,000 lives, combatants and innocent civilians caught in the crossfire together, and ushered a 30-month ceasefire period from July 1997 to April 2000 that served to energize Mindanao's economic development and social progress. The GRP panel then headed by General Manuel Yan, former ambassador and former Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs, and the MNLF panel chaired by Professor Nur Miswari, a UP alumnus, agreed that the comprehensive peace agreement must be forged according to 6 principles called the 6 paths of peace as follows. Number 1, path number 1, reforms to address the root causes of the armed conflicts and social unrest, calls for the vigorous implementation of interlocking socio-economic and political reforms to address the root causes of internal armed conflicts and social unrest. Path number 2, consensus building and empowerment for peace, meaning continuing consultations at the national level and local levels to build consensus for peace and development and to mobilize people's participation in the peace process. Path number 3, peace negotiations with rebel groups, which constitutes the pursuit of peaceful processes resulting in the settlement without recriminations of differences with rebel groups. And this must include also the rebels' integration or participation in mainstream civil and political life. And beyond the settlement of the conflicts, there's still much to do after the signing of the final peace agreement, or in the case now with the MILF, the Comprehensive Peace Compact. And so we have path number 4, reconciliation, reintegration, and rehabilitation. The implementation of programs for reconciliation, reintegration to mainstream society, and rehabilitation for those affected by the conflict must be part of the strategic long-term plan. And this guarantee the legal and security status of former rebels and to be promoted to achieve that are community-based rehabilitation.